How did you get in my fridge again? I mean, you were just in here. Doesn't it just seem like, well, actually, yeah, it was last week. You were in my fridge and we were talking about the feeding of the 5,000. Well, today, in our Revival from the Bible reading, we're going to be reading about the feeding of the 4,000. Sound familiar? And it gets me thinking about how many times in our lives does it seem like maybe the same thing is coming up because God is trying to teach us the same thing. Let's talk more about that today on Revival from the Bible. So today we read about the feeding of the 4,000 in Mark chapter 8. And just last week we read about the feeding of the 5,000 in Mark chapter 6. And again today you see the disciples saying, how can we feed all of these people way out here? And if you are like me when you're reading this, you're like, disciples, hello McFly, hello. Don't you remember the feeding of the 5,000? Don't you think Jesus has got this one? But once I'm done ragging on the disciples, I start thinking, hello McFly, how many times am I like that? How many times are you like that? Where it seems like the same thing happens and we respond the same way, right? A situation comes up and it's like, oh my, how's God going to get me out of this one? And he does. And 2 days later, a similar situation comes up and we're like, how's God going to get me out of this one? We respond the same way that the disciples did. So I want you to think about that today. What are those situations in your life? Maybe the things that keep coming up. Maybe situations where you continually get angry, or situations where you repeatedly get worried, or whatever situation that it might be. What I want you to do is think about those, and I want to just point out 3 things for you, right? That I would encourage you to respond in those situations. And the first is just notice the patience of God. Notice the patience of God. And even Jesus here, he doesn't scold the disciples, although there's times where he does rebuke them for their lack of faith. But even with the crowds, what he feels is compassion. Jesus is full of compassion, and thank God that he is patient with us. So when it's a new week, or we're on Tuesday and something is coming up and you're frustrated by having the same struggles and wanting to grow more, remember that God is patient. A second thing I would tell you is watch out for frustration. Lots of times when it feels like, man, there's something that keeps coming up that, man, I wish, why am I so thick-headed? Why does it take me so long to learn that lesson? I've found that, now again, we don't want to act like, it's nothing and I don't care about growing. No, we should care about growing. But what I've found is a lot of times people get frustrated, and that frustration is really more about you than anything else. You are frustrated that you are not doing better, and it's all about you now. Instead of really, man, I'm frustrated because this is affecting God or whatever it might be. I find lots of times that frustration, I think, is actually a tactic of the devil to get us off growing and what that would look like, and just getting us kind of having a pity party for ourselves. And that's not what we want to do. So thank God for his patience. Watch out for unnecessary frustration. And then 3, just keep seeking growth. You want to know something? There's going to be room for growth in your life until you're in glory, right? There's still going to be lessons that you need to learn. And sometimes God's going to need to teach you several times. He's going to have to use that teacher tactic of repetition to help you learn. And so instead of getting frustrated at God or frustrated at yourself, just keep seeking the growth. Keep seeking that, hey, next week I want to trust God more than this week. I'm sure I'm not going to be perfect, but I want to keep growing. I want to keep seeking God. I want to keep becoming more like Christ. So I hope that encourages you as you think through what about the things that you're having to learn repeatedly. Those three things I hope encourage you. Now we also read from 1 Corinthians chapter 5, which talks about an important idea of church discipline. And you see this idea of taking sin seriously. And that's something to know. That's something you should be doing as an individual. That's something we should be doing as a church. And even it highlights there's an especial danger of hanging out with people that claim to be Christians but aren't living it out. In fact, are denying it with their lives. That's even worse when then the world is just following their appetites and living like we would expect the world to do. But the other thing that I really want to share today comes from our Old Testament reading, and it's something that I don't know that people always think about. We just read the Israelites asked for a king. We want to be like everybody else. But why did they do that, and why was it a bad thing? Right? God makes it clear you should not have done this. Why was that so bad? And lots of times I think we just think, it's because they wanted to be like everybody else. But there's a nugget in our reading today that I want you to catch out. And that's in 1 Samuel 12:12. It says, "And when you saw that Nahash, the king of the Ammonites, came against you, you said to me, 'No, but a king shall reign over us,' when the Lord your God was your king." That's what he says. He says, hey, God gave you all these judges and he delivered you, but now there's this Ammonite king that has come, and guess what? That is when you said, hey, give us a king. We're scared of this bad guy. Give us a king. When the Lord your God was your king and he was providing for you. And so I want you to think about that again and how that applies to your own life. Because there's going to be situations where something scary happens to your life. And instead of saying, God is my refuge, God is my fortress, which is language I think we're going to see in our psalm reading today, we start running after something else. And that's never the way it should be. That wasn't the way it was supposed to be for Israel. That's not the way it's supposed to be for us. And I think that's something we miss a lot of times in the Old Testament. The context of the Israelites, actually what's going on is they were scared, and so they wanted a king to make them feel better, when God should have been enough, knowing that he was their rock, that he was their fortress. And who knows, maybe that's a lesson that you're having to learn repeatedly in your life. But in those times, let's remember, God is patient. Let's just not get frustrated at ourselves. That doesn't really do much good, but let's just keep seeking growth. And that's one of the things we want to do every day as we spend time seeking revival from the Bible. Have a great day.